If you have some proof that there was a God, that this God had one son, and he made this son come down, get the beat out of him, and nailed to a board so that we could all have no sin. Can you show me some studies? Do you have a box of evidence that you can pull out and we can examine all the different pieces that points to the undeniable conclusion that that's true? Because if you don't, then it's a myth.
The Gospels are our sources for knowing about the resurrection of Jesus. Are they the kind of sources that historians would want when trying to establish what probably happened in the past? I think the answer to that question is no. You don't have somebody who was there writing about it. Second point, none of the authors were eyewitnesses. Paul himself indicates that he was not an eyewitness, and none of the gospel writers was an eyewitness. People, of course, call the gospel books Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Well, they call them Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John because we don't know who wrote these books, and there's no point calling them Sam, Fred, Jerry, and Harry. I mean, they're written by people. We don't know who they were written by. They are anonymous. You might not think so because they have the title, The Gospel According to Matthew. Whoever put that title on it was an editor later. The original books are all anonymous, written in the third person. Moreover, the followers of Jesus were Aramaic-speaking peasants from Galilee, lower-class men who were not educated. In fact, Peter and John in Acts chapter 4, verse 13, are literally said to be illiterate. They couldn't read and write. Of course not. They were fishermen. They didn't go to school. The vast majority of people in the ancient world never learned to read, let alone write. And their native language was Aramaic. These books are written in Greek by highly educated, rhetorically trained writers who are skilled in Greek composition. Probably not disciples and don't claim to be disciples. Where did these authors get their stories from? Well, if they were not disciples of Jesus, they must have heard the stories from somebody, who heard the stories from somebody, who heard the stories from somebody, who heard them from somebody. Stories about Jesus, including his resurrection, had been in circulation. Year after year after year, they told stories to convert people. They improved the stories sometimes. They changed the stories sometimes. The stories got modified in the process of transmission over the course of decades before anybody wrote the stories down.
There is certainly no evidence for the resurrection. And the Bible itself records that all the disciples ran away when the Romans came for Jesus.
Are you claiming that there are no eyewitnesses that saw Jesus die on the cross?
I'm claiming there is no recorded written text or proof from eyewitnesses to the event taking place. What you said is the Bible states that there are people. That's still the Bible. It's not more than the Bible. If I write a text and I claim there's 1 million people that witness, there is not evidence for 1 million people. There's still my statement, one biblical statement. Bible is not an eyewitness account. It's a copy of 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 something written by an unknown individual.
Jesus' original disciples, Aramaic-speaking Jews, who remained faithful to the Jewish law and who kept Jewish customs even after coming to believe that Jesus was the Messiah. End quote. They didn't go around teaching the Nicene Creed, the Athanasian Creed, begotten sonship, divine incarnation, belief in a triune God. That would insult the very fabric of their religion. When the proto-Orthodox positions eventually won, following the conversion of Constantine, the entire history of the internal conflicts of early Christianity were rewritten to make it seem as if there had been very little conflict. But today we know that's not true, and only books that demonstrated a relatively congenial relationship between the Judaizers and the Hellenizers, in other words, between Peter and Paul or James and Paul, they were accepted as canonical. And everything else and everyone else was completely marginalized. If you read the book of Acts, read a sermon of Paul in the book of Acts, sermon of Paul, and compare it to a sermon of Peter in the book of Acts. They're virtually identical. It's like the same speaker. But in Galatians, there is a hint of this deep conflict when Paul accuses Peter and Barnabas of hypocrisy and brags about withstanding Peter to his face. They're literally standing toe to toe, ready to throw down, as they say. In the homilies of Clement, Peter says to Paul, how can we believe you, even if he has appeared to you? But if you were visited by him for the space of an hour, and were instructed by him, and thereby have become an apostle, then proclaim his words, expound what he has taught, be a friend to his apostles, and do not contend with me.
If you believe God is a man, then you're preaching paganism. There's no difference between you and a Hindu. What's the difference between you and a Hindu? You think God is a man.
وقولهم إنا قتلنا المسيح عيسى ابن مريم رسول الله وما قتلوه وما صلبوه وإن الذين اختلفوا فيه لفي شك منه ما لهم به من علم إلا اتباع الظن وما